Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and happy to welcome all of you here this afternoon. I appreciate you joining us. I'm Kevin Moore. I am from Oklahoma State University, and I work in Extension for Horticulture and Landscape Architecture. And I'm part of the Think Water group. So Think Water is focused on water conservation for the state of Oklahoma, and we do a lot of activities like this, working with homeowners and municipalities and trying to help people to understand how they can conserve water. And primarily we're dealing with outdoor water conservation topics, so things like what are some great drought-tolerant plants that you can use in the landscape. Also things like if you have a home irrigation system, how can we ensure that your irrigation system is working efficiently, and how can we make sure that we're not using more water than we need to be to have good plant health. So there's lots of different ways that we can conserve water outside, and that's one of our big goals, is trying to help you with achieving that. So did anyone come to our workshop last month? Any familiar folks in the room? Okay, a couple of you all. So you're going to know the answer to my quiz questions that I have at the beginning of this presentation. So you can decide if you want to look really smart. Well, actually, I ruined that for you now, right? But you'll know all the answers. You can help out your peers if you decide you want to do that. But again, Think Water, we are partnering with the city of Edmond. Also, we've been partnering with the city of Oklahoma City for a number of years in trying to deliver messages about responsible water use and using irrigation and good landscaping practices in order to help to preserve water, which is one of our most precious resources. And I know right now it seems like we have it in abundance. But if you've lived in Oklahoma any period of time, you know that we go through these periods of drought and then periods of abundance. And we happen to be in a period of abundance right now, but we're going to be moving into drought at some point again. So we need to always be very conscious as to how we're using water. Okay, so a couple of quizzes just to get us started. So City of Edmond, typical water consumption during the winter is about 8 million gallons per day. That's a lot of water, right? How high do you think it can get during the summer? 20 million a day? Okay, that's a good guess. 40 million. Okay, so we got 20 and 40. 16? 24. All right, we got some good guesses out there. Nobody thinks it's less than 8 million, right? So definitely water conservation is going up when we get into the summer. So yeah, we get about 26 million. That's about the peak that we'd see in the summer. So 24, I think, is our winner here. Good job. You go back home, brag to your family and friends. So summer water conservation. This is one of the issues that we have. This is why we do things like have odd even watering. So this is to help make sure that we have water resources available, and also helps with conservation during the summer. Okay, so on average in Oklahoma, how much water does a typical person use each day? So I've got some cues here to help you. So somewhere between 53 gallons and 222 gallons. So who thinks A? Let's just give the old show of hands here. A, that's 53 gallons. Okay, got 3 of you there. B is 80 gallons. So how many people thinking B? Okay, fair. What about C, 185 gallons? One up here. And who's thinking I'm going for the gusto? 222 gallons a day. Okay, so we've got one person over here. So let's see, what's the answer? 185 gallons per person per day. Yeah, that's a lot of water, right? And that's an average. So that means some people are using considerably more. Some people are using quite a bit less.
How does that relate to like other states?
So what you see is in states that have implemented more water conservation practices and regulations, you see that number coming down. So If you look at a state like Texas or New Mexico that has put some water conservation programs and a lot of water restrictions in place as well, that number can go down to 110 or less. Some communities are trying to get down into the 80s and the 90s. So definitely with some focused attention, you can drive that number down. And a lot of communities, they've seen significant reductions in water consumption by having some targeted programs like that in place. Okay, so what about how effectively we use our water outdoors? So what percentage of outdoor water use do you think is wasted while we're watering the landscape? So 25, 50, 75, 100, 75%? Anyone else want to throw 50? 50? 50 or 75 we're thinking? Yeah, so as much as 50% can be wasted. And that's due to things like wind. So I'm putting the water in my irrigation system, the wind in Oklahoma, right? It's a little crazy sometimes, carrying that water away. Now that could be because I have very small droplet sizes, so the water's kind of easy for the wind to carry off. It could be I have irrigation equipment that's not well adjusted or not working properly, so it's spraying onto the street, it's spraying onto the driveway, whatever, and so that's just running down the drain, so to speak. So runoff, evaporation, maybe I'm irrigating in the middle of the day, and so I'm having a lot more evaporation that's taking place. But yeah, so we can have some significant losses that are happening during the time that we're watering our landscapes. Okay, and then if I'm watering an average sized lawn for 20 minutes a day for a week, how much water am I using, right? And so we're doing this in equivalency. So think about how much water you use when you're running the shower. So 4 hours, 24 hours, 2 days or 4 days worth of water. What do you think? Anybody want to go all the way to D?
Yeah, I'm going.
You're going for D, all right. You've been really going for the gusto. That's good. Any other guesses we want to hazard here? Okay, so it's like running the shower nonstop for 4 days. So good job sticking your stake in the ground there. It's about 12,000 gallons worth of water if you were to irrigate an average sized lawn for 20 minutes a day. Now that is a very common amount of time for someone to have an automatic irrigation system running if they have a sprinkler system in their yard. So a 15 to 20 or 25 minute run time for each zone. And so that can use a lot of water. Now in Oklahoma City and in Edmond, we do have mandatory limitations. You can only water on the odd day of the week or the even day of the week, so it does help to cut that back. But of course, when it's been raining like it's been raining so far this spring, really we don't have any need to be irrigating yet. So there's really no need for us to be watering our lawns right now. Maybe some supplemental watering if you have some plants that are underneath the porch or something like that, or maybe they don't get very good rainfall because of an overhang on your house or something. But most of your trees and plants and shrubs in your yard right now don't need any supplemental watering. Okay, last question here. Cost of a gallon of water to a residential customer in Edmond. So we'll see who looks at their utility bill. Is it closest to about a cent a gallon, 5 cents, 10 cents, or 25 cents? 10 cents? Yeah, so it's about 0.7 cents per gallon. So typically this is a rate structure that changes based on how much water that you're using. And so as you use more water, it gets a little bit more expensive. That's good because that does help with conservation. But the takeaway I want you to get here is that the cost of water is very low. The value of water is very high, right? We cannot live for very long without water, and so it's important that we would have it. About 70% of the earth is covered in water. You probably remember that from like a middle school, junior high science class. Only about 2.5% of this is fresh water that we can drink. And only a portion of that fresh water is really easily accessible for us to use for drinking water and irrigation and all the things we use water for. And we are about 60% water, and we can only live for just a few days without water, and we have to have 2 or 3 liters of water each day to survive. So it's, yeah, everybody's like grabbing their water now, feeling like they need to take a drink. But water is definitely a precious resource to us, and we certainly recognize it whenever water is not here. So we've been seeing a lot of this, right? Lots of flooded streets. But we also remember what Lake Hefner looked like during the last drought, right? And we know if we live in Oklahoma long enough, we're going to see this again. And so we want to make sure that we are having good practices in place and making sure that we are continuing to value the resources that we have. And again, this is our precipitation history in Oklahoma. So you'll see there are times when we have less rainfall than what would be considered normal for our region, and times that we have more rainfall than what would be considered average for our region. But we go through these cycles of drier periods and wetter periods. And so we have to be ready for the next drought that's going to be coming, because we know it's just a matter of time before we're going to have a dry time again. Okay, so population of Edmond has been increasing a lot in the last 20 years, right? So about 35% growth within the last 20 years. And the city's investing a lot of resources into upgrading and expanding the water and wastewater facilities across town. And so this is one of the reasons that Edmond's also concerned about continuing to educate the public about water conservation, is they want to make sure that the resources are there and available when we need them, that they'll support continued growth, and that Edmond will be able to continue to be a great place to live. So I'm going to stop this little part of the presentation. This is sort of we always want to make sure we're talking about water conservation. But the main focus of our talk today is going to be related to drought-resistant plants that are I'm trying to think what the right word is. Yes, well adapted, thank you. Well adapted to the type of climate and conditions that we have in Oklahoma. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh Campbell, and he is going to speak today more about the plants and some of the things that you can look at utilizing in your flower beds and gardens.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. Like Dr. Moore said, what we're going to try to do over the next 45 minutes or so is just kind of highlight this concept of drought-tolerant plants that are well adapted to Oklahoma. And as many of you have seen, there's a really nice publication that OSU has put out, which certainly is not exhaustive, but highlights many of the good plant selections that are available for you here as residents of Edmond. You can find them at local garden centers, and would make a good addition to your landscape. And I think it does a great job of breaking them down by category and by how you would use them in the landscape. So I hope that you find that a useful publication as you go home and you start to implement some of these things that we talk about today. Again, I want to emphasize we are Think Water, so we are an initiative or a program of Oklahoma State University's Extension, Education and Outreach. And so we have partners like City of Edmond, City of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma Water Resources Board, and we represent different areas of expertise, but it's all centered around this initiative of water conservation. And our goal is to help Oklahomans use water more responsibly. So when you hear the term water conservation, what I'd like you to think about is this definition that I've come up with. I think if you were to Google water conservation, you'll probably come up with a lot of different definitions, a lot of different concepts. You may think back to California and people telling you not to have turf in your yard, or you may think about rocks and cactus, whatever comes to mind. I think this is a definition that we would like you to think about here in Oklahoma, which is that it is strategies and practices to help manage the use of water in your landscape as efficiently and responsibly as possible. So it's not about not using water. Of course, we all have to use water, and in order to have beautiful landscapes, sometimes that requires supplementation with irrigation. But when we do so, let's do so in the most efficient and responsible way possible. And that's not only good for our pocketbooks, but it's also good for the environment. The situation here in the Oklahoma City metro, as we look, kind of scale back and look at what our situation is. If you think back to the 1980s, and I don't have a lot of memories from 1980, but the population of the Oklahoma City metro was less than half of what it is now. It's since grown to about 1.4 million people, and it continues to grow at a pretty good pace when you compare it to other major metropolitan areas. It's a very fast-growing metropolitan area. And back in the 1980s, when new homes were built, it wasn't extremely common practice for a really nice ornate landscape and irrigation system to be slapped in. Now, I doubt there's a single home, a new built home, that is built without an irrigation system. It's just common practice. And what that has resulted in is a lot of increase in supply demand, water that's demanded on a regular basis, and also a lot of irresponsible, inefficient use of water as well. And so I believe this all points to a need for more efficient irrigation. But as we come back to plants and we talk about plants, I'd like us to remember that plants matter. So of course I'm not trying to say we don't need to have beautiful landscapes. I'm hoping that by the end of the day you'll understand that you can have beautiful landscapes and also do so with low water inputs. But plants add beauty, shade, clean air, property value. They're therapeutic. One of my favorite things to do every morning before work is go out with my cup of coffee and just look at my flowers and my landscape. And so certainly there are many, many benefits of plants, but what we'll emphasize today is how we manage them related to their impact on water. So when you're selecting plants and you look through this book, there's going to be a lot of different types of plants that come at you, and you may be looking for plants that add texture, maybe you're looking for plants to give height, or you're looking for blooms and color. A lot of people really want landscapes that have seasonal interest, so no matter what time of year, there's something interesting to look at. And so you can accomplish that with plants that are in that book. And then of course, water requirements. The thing to emphasize is that plants are not all the same. Not everything that you walk over to Home Depot or Lowe's or any garden center here in town and pick up is going to be the best option for your landscape. You have to, unfortunately, do a little bit of investigation sometimes and really understand what's going to work here, what isn't. And so most of the time, the plants have a little bit of a description of what their needs and requirements are, but sometimes it takes a little bit of trial and error. Even within landscapes here in central Oklahoma, there's going to be microclimates, there's going to be different soil types, and so what works well isn't necessarily just something that you will pick up at the garden center. They don't always have, I guess what I'm saying is, don't always have bulletproof plants available, and so sometimes what you buy may take more care, and other times it may take less care. And so being aware of those things and what plants need is important. Some plants require full sun. Others really need shade. Some prefer a balance of shade and sun. Some really prefer dry soils, and then others prefer moist conditions. And so it's really important to take an account of your landscape and what you have to offer. If you have a really an abundance of trees, old trees and shade in your landscape, the plant palette, while the principles may be the same, planning for water efficiency and for drought tolerance, the plant palette itself is going to look a little bit different than if you have a landscape that has no trees and you have full sun. And so thinking about those things and accounting for those things will be important for success moving forward. But ultimately, it's based on what your goals are, okay? So I always tell people I want water conservation to be up there on their priority of goals, but we all come with other goals. Maybe our goal is to have the least amount of maintenance and care as possible, but still have beauty. Maybe we don't mind a lot of work and extra care, but we want to pump out as much beauty and maximum appearance as possible. Maybe it's to save money, and so whatever our goal is, just keep that in mind as you plan your landscape. And when you have your goal front and center, a lot of times it makes it easier to think about the management of your landscape. And so I'm not going to ask for a poll of hands, but certainly when I talk about water conservation, I feel that many people, this is where they go. They think about arid landscapes, and many people may enjoy landscapes like this. I think that they have their own unique beauty. But this is not what I'm talking about when I talk about water conservation. All right? In fact, many landscapes like this, with as much rainfall as we get in springs like this year, would really suffer. Unless they had engineered, well-improved drainage, these types of landscapes would have suffered in a year like this. And so what I'm talking about is landscapes that are resilient enough to withstand seasonal periods, 6 to 8 weeks of heavy rainfall like we've experienced this spring, but then also periods of extended dry like we may be going into over the course of the next few months and into the summer. So a water conservation, water efficient landscape here in Oklahoma probably looks more like this, all right? And in fact, I was going to show you this slide here just to reemphasize that succulents are great, but this is not what I mean by water conservation. And in fact, I like to joke with people. Most people say, oh, I kill succulents. The number one cause of succulent death, as far as I'm concerned, is overwatering. And so this is what I mean by a water conserving landscape here in Oklahoma. I'm talking about well-adapted plants, mostly perennials, mulched landscapes, soil that is healthy enough to provide ongoing nutrients. As that mulch breaks down, it's going to feed the soil, and so you know your care, once established, is minimal. Both water inputs, fertilization inputs, all those things are very minimal, and seasonal mulching, once a year or so, continues to provide that cover to lock in moisture in the soil, and also as that mulch breaks down, it continues to feed the plants. And so the wonderful thing about Oklahoma, as Dr. Moore showed earlier, that precipitation history over the last 100 years or so, that black line right down the center is 34 inches of average precipitation. That's a statewide average. And so when you compare the 34 inches that we receive on average of rainfall to other parts of the United States, especially like the arid Southwest, it allows us or affords us the ability to have much different looking landscapes while still being xeric and drought tolerant. And so I guess bottom line, I'd like you to erase the cactus and succulents and rocks pictures from your mind. And if you like those, that's okay. Certainly you can have those here in Oklahoma, but I'd like you to erase that from your mind when you think about a water efficient landscape, and think a little bit more about what that looks like here in Oklahoma. Drought tolerant landscapes here are going to include well-adapted plants, so plants just like the ones that are in the book that we gave you. They're going to hinge on healthy soil. Just like we are dependent on our immune system to defend us from illnesses and things that could make us sick, plants really depend on a healthy soil and healthy root systems. And so the more you can do to provide them a healthy soil, the longer and happier they're going to perform for you, and the less ongoing issues and stress they're gonna experience. Mulch is key. Of course, you can go overboard with mulch. If you pile mulch 3 feet high around the trunk of a tree, you can kill it. But in general, a good 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch over landscape beds and topping that up once a year or so is going to regulate soil temperature. So it's going to keep, in the hot, dry summer months, it's going to keep that soil temperature much cooler than the ambient outside temperature, which is going to make your plants and their root systems happy. It's also going to lock in moisture for a long time. The water that's held right there in that root zone where the plants are is not going to be as susceptible to the solar radiation and evaporative loss as if you didn't have mulch, or even your lawn or other areas where there's just not as much ability to hold in that moisture. So mulch is really important. And then an efficient watering schedule. Once established, a lot of these landscapes can can experience periods of extended time without any supplemental irrigation. In fact, sometimes in normal years, maybe they don't get any irrigation at all once established. But certainly there's what we would call establishment periods. If you're planting a new tree, if you're planting a new shrub, any perennial plant, that transplant shock, taking it from the container, putting it into the landscape, it's going to require a period of time where you are caring for it, you are watering it in. But once it's established, once it's set its roots, and once it's really made its home there in your landscape, at a certain point you can back off and go long periods of time without water. And a lot of times we may, even though it's hot and dry and it really is starting to feel like summer outside today, in many cases, you could probably pull back the soil, the mulch, or pull back the soil a few inches and find that there's still a lot of moisture locked in the soil. So, as we talk more about plants, this is a plant promotion program housed at Oklahoma State University that I'd like to make you familiar with. Many of the plants that are in that book are also Oklahoma proven plants. But the idea of Oklahoma proven is to promote, the emphasis is not water conservation, so it's more of just plants that are well suited and well adapted to Oklahoma. And if you go to oklahomaproven.org, you can find plants every year since 1999, so this is actually the 20th anniversary of the program. They have selected an annual, a perennial, a tree, and a shrub, so 4 plants, one for each category, and they highlight it, and they suggest that as a plant that has been proven to do well here in Oklahoma. And so I'll highlight this year's winners. Rattlesnake Master is the perennial for this year. It's actually an Oklahoma native plant, and it's really, really neat. I have this in my landscape. It kind of creates this kind of almost kind of cross between a yucca and grass type look at the base, but then it has all these really cool ornate ping pong ball looking flower spikes at the top. And it's extremely resistant. I actually have it in an area of my landscape that probably receives more water than this would normally like in the natural in its natural environment, and it's thriving and doing well. But I've also seen it doing extremely well in areas that are really, really dry and receive no care and maintenance. And so what I like about this plant is it seems to just make itself happy wherever it's planted. And so whether we have 6 weeks of more rainfall than we know what to do with, or we have 6 weeks of really, really dry conditions, I think this would be a proven successful plant for you. And it really can be a feature or accent piece in the landscape. The flowering quince is a really pretty shrub that is on this year's Oklahoma Proven list. It has these awesome flowers that just fill the whole shrub, and it blooms pretty much all season from spring all the way into early fall. It has it's called the Double Take series because it has these double flowers, and it's just a really nice, again, bold plant for the landscape. It comes in several different colors. This happens to be the red one, but there's an orange, there's a pink, and there may also be a white or a peachy color. So that's a great one. This is the annual for 2019. This is the Graffiti series Starflower. It's also a Penta, if you've probably heard of Pentas. This is just a cultivar, a selection of Pentas. And when we think about container plants, accent plants, annuals are great for that. Annuals are, I would say, of course, when you build a landscape, you want to focus on establishing the core plants that are going to be there year after year. They're not going to they're going to establish themselves, and they're going to provide some sort of interest for years and years to come. And that's where I would focus, is on your annual plants, on your perennial plants. But your annual plants certainly provide opportunities to improve porches with planters. They do really good as pops of color along borders. And so this annual plant is a great plant for containers, and really does well under low water conditions. And pretty tolerant of heat and sun, and just a really fun, beautiful plant to have in your landscape. The tree for this year is the Vanderwolf's Pyramid Limber Pine, and it is just a really hardy tree, and a pine tree at that. It is low maintenance, and it's pretty resilient to a lot of the pine wilt diseases and things that have affected other pines that we have in this area, and so it's a great option. So those are the 4 plants for this year. I'd encourage you to go to oklahomaproven.org, and you can actually access this publication, which is another publication similar to that, and that this has the last 20 years of Oklahoma proven plants listed out there. And it's a great resource. The one you have in front of you specifically is looking at plants through the lens or angle of drought tolerance. And this is more looking at plants across categories, across plants of all kinds, and ones that can and have been proven to do well in Oklahoma. If any of you familiar with cooperative extension, county level cooperative extension? So I am the urban ag and natural resource educator here in Oklahoma County. So I'm kind of the local boots on the ground representative of the university in Stillwater. And so if you have the need to do a soil sample or a water quality sample, if you need assistance with weed issues in your lawn, anything and everything in between. If you're going through a divorce and you need to do a co-parenting class, we provide those resources, and you can actually see a little bit of what all we do in this publication here. But at our office, we are actually in the process right now of redoing our landscape, and we're creating this area called the Oklahoma Proven Show and Tell Garden. We're going to have almost all of the last 20 years of Oklahoma Proven plants on showcase here. We're going to have them labeled. You can come and actually see what they look like in the landscape and get a feel for whether that might be a good fit for you or not. And so actually, you look at my pants, I'm all muddy and dirty. The whole morning I spent working in the garden, planting and stuff. So, yes.
So where's your office?
Our office is located at 2500 Northeast 63rd, and the address is there in this little booklet, and also on the back of every folder that you got has all the addresses and phone numbers for every county office. We have 77 counties in Oklahoma, and we actually have 77 OSU offices, one for every county. So no matter where you find yourself in the state of Oklahoma, you're just a short distance from resources at OSU. And so if you're not familiar with the area, we share a campus with the Oklahoma City County Health Department building. We're just north of the Remington Park racetrack facility, 63rd and Eastern. Just a quarter mile east of Eastern on 63rd. And so I'd encourage you to come by our office and check this out. We're still in the process of installing it, but we plan to have a grand opening celebration this fall sometime. This is our Oklahoma State wildflower. It's Gaillardia grandiflora. You might have heard it called the Indian blanket or blanket flower. It is an Oklahoma proven, and it's this is a picture from our Oklahoma Proven garden that I took yesterday or the day before. The Drought-Tolerant Plant Guidebook, we'll roll into that now, is an excellent resource. And like I said, it's by no means exhaustive, and we're actually going through the process of coming out with a version 2 now that is going to add some new plants. But it's a good place to start. Certainly when you're looking at maybe revamping your landscape, you're looking at gardening with drought tolerance and water efficiency in mind, this list of plants is a great place to start. And I'd encourage you to maybe even take it with you when you go into a garden center or something, and use it as a guide for how you look at plants. What I like about it is it actually explains so it gives you the name. It also gives you the botanic name. It tells you the season that it provides the most interest in the landscape. So this would be summer. And then in addition, it tells you its vertical and its horizontal growth habit. So this plant here is going to max out at about 9 inches tall and about 12 inches wide. So you can kind of start to plan for how that might look and work in your landscape. And then it's going to tell you on a scale of 1 to 3 what its water needs are. So by no means, when we say 3 water drops, do I mean that this is a water-loving plant in comparison to all plants, but in comparison to the drought-tolerant plant list itself that we put together, this is going to require more water than this. And so don't let that confuse you, but just in general, there's going to be some variance and some difference of water needs within this list of plants. In addition, it tells you if it's got the full sun logo there, it tells you that it's full sun, and then it'll tell you if it's native to Oklahoma, whether it's not native to the U.S. at all, or whether it's native to this region. So those are all helpful little icons that can help you navigate that guidebook. Just a quick highlight of annuals, perennials, shrubs, trees, ornamental grasses. For those of you who may be wondering in a little bit more depth about how these are distinguished, annual plants are plants that are going to generally die after one season here in Oklahoma. Just because it's listed as an annual here doesn't mean that it's an annual everywhere. It has to do with its growing zone. So certainly we can benefit and enjoy plants that aren't going to survive our winters, and we would call those annuals. But if they survive, let's say in Texas, well then they wouldn't be listed as an annual in Texas, they would be a perennial. So the difference between an annual and perennial really has to do with whether it's going to survive season after season here in your landscape or whether it's going to be a one and done type of plant. A lot of times, annuals, though, if you allow them, will self-seed or reseed year after year. And so you can actually benefit from annuals as if they were perennials because they will self-seed. Zinnias are a great example of that. If you let the seed heads fall back where they grew, they will perform as a perennial. Several other plants I'll show you. Globe amaranth is one. That's a celosia. Globe amaranth is a celosia. So celosias are great plants that will reseed and come back year after year. And as a rule, they typically have a 4 to 6 month window of performance here in Oklahoma. They're going to be great for borders, for pops of color, for containers. And in general, they're almost always going to require more moisture and more care than a perennial plant. These are some of my favorite annuals, and these are all in that drought-tolerant guidebook, but just some of the ones that I really like and I use in my landscape. Globe amaranth, it comes in all different colors. It has these fun little ping pong ball type balls on the flower, and it comes in all colors from white to red to burgundy to blue, yellow, all sorts of different options. And then the gomphrena actually come in a few different species. Cosmos are one that I really like in my landscape. They do require a little bit more water than some plants, but they're a great option, especially if you like to have cut flowers and things around the landscape. I use all 3 of these in my garden every year. And then zinnias. Zinnias are a wonderful, fun flower that can make anybody feel like a successful gardener if you give them the right conditions. They like good full sun. They'll bloom for you. You can let them die back in the fall and just cut the spent flowers, let those fall to the ground and kind of rough it into the soil there, and they'll come right back for you next year and give you flowers again. Perennials. This is a shot of our south side of our extension center. We have rose rosette trials that are going on, and so we planted roses to see which ones will get the rose rosette disease and which ones won't. But in between that, we've got this beautiful nepeta, this catmint, and it smells really nice and minty, and I think it's called catmint because cats go crazy over it. I've not actually seen a cat going crazy over it, but I've heard that they do. In general, perennials like this are any plant that's going to come back year after year. And some perennials may only have a 3, 4, 5 year life cycle before they start to kind of wither out and die. And then you may have other plants that can perform for generations. There are some perennial plants that may outlive us. And so it just kind of depends on the plant and also on the conditions that you provide it. So these are going to be your permanent fixtures in your landscape and really what you build your landscape around. And so when you think about building a new bed or whatever, these are going to be things that you're going to have in the center, in the back, maybe as focal points, and then any gaps is where you would use your annuals. In general, there's some exceptions, but in general, they have a season of performance or of interest. So, generally they may bloom in the spring and then just have green foliage the rest of the year. They bloom in the summer or bloom in the fall. So they're going to have different times of the year that they look pretty. Some of the favorite perennials that I threw up to highlight, again, these are all in this book. Moonshine yarrow is one. Yarrow is actually native to Oklahoma. This cultivar, with the bright yellow, you will not see in nature, but you probably in roadside ditches all the time see yarrow and don't even realize it. The little white clusters of flowers, that's a wild yarrow. And this cultivated variety, Moonshine, is a really, really pretty plant that performs really well. And the pollinators love it. Autumn sage is another one of my favorites, Salvia gregii. It blooms pretty much from spring all the way into fall, but they call it autumn sage because in the fall, right as the temperatures start to switch from really hot and start to cool down, it just blooms so pretty. Hummingbirds go crazy over it, butterflies love it. So if you have an interest in inviting pollinators to your landscape, that would be a good one to have. And I have a big autumn sage shrub right next to the entrance of my house, and I rub my fingers through it every time I walk into my front door, and it just smells really fragrant and nice. Another one I like is this stonecrop. It's a kind of like a succulent in the feel and the texture of the leaves. They're real thick, slick leaves, and it just loves hot, dry conditions, but will also tolerate moisture. And in the fall, it performs really, really fun with these purple and pink flowers. And again, pollinators love it. What I like about it is it'll start out kind of small and just kind of like a little kind of shrubbish type perennial plant. But over time, it will kind of just create this big ball in your landscape, and it'll get about 2 to 3 feet wide, and it just looks really cool. So those are some of my favorites that I'm highlighting. Trees and shrubs. Trees are definitely those perennial things in the landscape that are big decisions, costly sometimes to install or to tear down, and so these, I would say, really take a lot of forethought and planning when you put trees in. I see all over the metro houses where people put like the blue Atlas cedars about a foot from the house, right under the eaves of the house. And it looks really good when that plant's a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. At about the 10-year mark, 12-year mark, you have to call a tree person to pull it out, or it dies before that because it starts to become a problem. So if you have a budget where you can change out trees in your landscape every 5 years, then good for you. If not, then think a little bit ahead about how you plant trees and how you utilize trees in your landscape. Some are going to work really well and are going to be compact and maybe work for tight areas. Others are going to need massive space to really be happy and successful. But trees have a tendency to just continue to grow and grow and grow despite there being a house there or something, a power line or whatever. So thinking about those things are important. Sometimes we buy a house and we just inherit problem trees, and so we can always plan ahead. Sometimes we have to deal with issues that we were dealt, but always plan ahead with trees. These provide awesome habitat for wildlife, and trees are probably the most resilient and drought tolerant pieces of any landscape once established. Once you've got a tree through the first couple of years of its life cycle, you could almost step back and do nothing for the rest of time, and it will probably survive. Some varieties that are not well adapted to Oklahoma may be susceptible to disease or to pest pressures or whatever, but for the most part, trees, once established, are going to do their thing. And really the reason for that is that they have such deep root systems. And so perennial plants, annual plants, turf grasses are accessing water that's in that top 12 to 18 inches of the soil, where trees, they're able to access water that may be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 feet deep into the soil. And so they have a lot more ability to withstand dry times. Some of my favorite trees, again, these are just my favorites. There's a lot of options in this book for you. The Vitex is one of my favorites. It's called the chase tree. It can be pruned up like a tree, or it can be allowed to shrub, but has these beautiful blue, purple flowers, and the pollinators go crazy and love it, and it just loves to exist, and it pretty much will tolerate just about any conditions that you can give it. And it's a great middle-sized tree. It can get 10, 12 feet tall, and it can get about 10, 12 feet wide. So if you have space limitations, it's a really great, beautiful tree for the landscape. These other two, the bald cypress certainly is an awesome tree. I love it. It's native to Oklahoma, native to southeastern Oklahoma, and it's a deciduous evergreen tree, or deciduous cypress, and so it will lose its leaves in the fall, but it just is real stately and beautiful. However, it needs a lot of space. You may have seen, well, if you've ever been up to Stillwater and you've seen Theta Pond, all those trees around Theta Pond that get huge, those are bald cypress. And so they can, over time, get very, very huge, and they need their space. Another one that I really like is the Arizona cypress. It's an evergreen, so it's all year long is going to have this beautiful kind of icy frosted blue look, and it's very resilient to dry conditions. And so really it's been a bulletproof tree. We have seen some cases here in the last few years of Arizona cypress that are getting what's called a ceridium canker. So like anything, diseases kind of come in and crop up from time to time. Pests that we didn't know would be an issue at one point become an issue. So like anything, this list of plants is a mosaic, and sometimes we may find that a plant on this list is susceptible to a disease or to a pest or something we weren't aware of. And this is one of those ones where we thought it was just a silver bulletproof tree for Oklahoma, and we're finding that in some cases it is susceptible to a disease. However, my experience has been it's mainly in areas where the tree was already in a stressful situation. Maybe it was not properly planted, or it was neglected, pruned really harshly. So there are some environmental factors that may push it over the edge, but it's all in all still a great tree. Ornamental grasses. This is probably one that this could be lumped in with the perennials, or it could be a category of its own. I chose to make it a category of its own because I think of these as an underutilized piece of the landscape. A lot of people don't like them because they don't generally give color. There are some grasses that may give a little purple tinge or whatever, but they don't give color, but they give nice texture and accents to the landscape. Mexican feathergrass this is just a picture from the myriad of some Mexican feathergrass there. They tend to just give you interest all year long. They are fun to have in your landscape, and I just encourage you, if you haven't used them before, to think about using them. Oklahoma is a historically prairie state. Grasses seem to really be happy here, and so once established, again, these ornamental grasses will provide you benchmark landscape pieces that you have to do very little to make happy and to keep up year after year. If you do have shadier parts of the landscape, these are all three native to Oklahoma, these grasses. But this northern sea oats is a fun one. It's sometimes called fish on a pole grass. It grows native in Oklahoma right on kind of the fringe of the tree line. So right as like where prairie meets forest, in that kind of understory partial shade area. So if you've got partial shade areas of your landscape and you're looking for some good texture, northern sea oats is a good grass for that. Blue grama, little blue stem are great accent plants. The blue grama has these awesome little seed heads that just look like little dancing insects or something, and so they're fun, and they do really well in containers. And then the little blue stem is a fun one. Its cousin, the big blue stem, will get 6, 8, 10, 12 feet tall. And so sometimes it's maybe a little much for people's landscapes, but the little blue stem will give you that kind of fun fountain experience with a compact grass. This is where people probably have some of the most confusion or maybe misconception about turf grasses and how they're used and their drought tolerance, their drought resistance. In general, there are two types or categories of turf grasses. There are those that are called cool season turf grasses, and those are going to be grasses that perform best in cooler temperatures. So here in Oklahoma, you'll know that as tall fescue, maybe Kentucky bluegrass, maybe perennial rye. And then the warm season grasses are grasses that perform best in warm temperatures, and they're also going to be grasses that are going to perform best in full sun. So Bermuda, zoysia, and buffalo are examples of that. Buffalo grass is native to Oklahoma. It's a short grass prairie grass. I have most of my front yard is buffalo grass with some Bermuda here and there. And I like it because it terminates its growing height at about 10 to 12 inches. And so you don't have to mow as frequently. I mow about a third as much in my front yard where I have a good stand of buffalo as I do in my back where I have mostly Bermuda and other things. And so it's a nice grass, really tolerant of dry conditions. You can go with very little fertilization, very little moisture, and be very happy and look healthy like this. One downside, or two downsides, I guess, has no tolerance at all really for shade. So it will not grow in any parts of the landscape that get even dappled shade really will deter it. And then it doesn't hold up to heavy traffic. So if you are constantly playing on your yard, you have dogs running back and forth everywhere, that can be an issue. But otherwise, it loves really dry conditions, doesn't need a lot of fertilization, doesn't have a lot of disease or pest issues associated with it. The most common grass, turf grass, that you will see utilized here in Oklahoma is Bermuda grass. And really the reason for that is there's not much that outperforms it in terms of its ability to be a dense, nice green cover for a lawn. Performs really, really well here in Oklahoma and comes back every year. You don't typically have a lot of dieback or anything, and it just seems to be a good grass here. And so as far as successful lawns, Bermuda grass is by far the most commonly used grass. Tall fescue is going to be something you'll find used in the shadier areas of your lawn. And these all have an ability, I guess you could say, to hold up to drought. Bermuda grass is known as what's called drought tolerant, in that it has an ability to withstand long periods of dry before it just shuts down and dies. Tall fescue is what we would call more drought resistant, in that it has long tap roots, and so when it is experiencing drought, it will just send down deeper roots and try to access moisture deeper into the soil. That being said, they do require moisture, and tall fescue especially is going to require a lot of ongoing care and moisture and maintenance over the summer months. And so if you were to rank these, it would be buffalo, Bermuda, and tall fescue in terms of ranking of their water needs. Some of the honorable mentions that I just had to throw out there: creeping phlox. This is one of my front flower beds. I just love the springtime when this is the first thing that blooms in the landscape, and it just looks amazing for about a month or two. And then the rest of the year, it's just this nice green flowing carpet that hangs over the bed borders. And so if you don't have some of this in your landscape, especially if you're looking for something to kind of ride on the edge of a border, use some of this in your landscape. Something that is really uncommon, and I only came across a few years ago, is this blue mist flower, also called Greg's mist flower. I was given 2 little plugs of it, and I put it in, and it's turned to that. This is my front walk up to my house. There's the autumn sage I was telling you about that I rub my fingers through. But this blooms starting about right now all the way through to the fall. Monarchs love it. All the pollinators love it. It has this awesome, it's got kind of like a lime green leafy color all year, but this awesome blue flower. And they call it a mist flower because it's just kind of these little wispy blue fingers. And you can cut it and put it in bouquets for fun little accent in bouquets. It just looks awesome all summer long without any care or maintenance, and it comes back year after year and does its thing. And so for me, this is probably one of my favorite plants that I've come across in recent years. Loves anything you throw at it, wet or dry. All of these plants, all of the plants in that book there, and most of the plants I've talked about today are actually available on this database here on the City of Edmond website. They have this drought-tolerant plant database. And so if you just go to City of Edmond website and you search drought-tolerant plant database, it should pop up. And you can go through and you can set search criteria. So you can set looking for annuals, looking for perennials, looking for trees, shrubs, any of the parameters you want to check yes on, and then it will generate a search with the plants that meet those criteria that you set. So if you want to find this online, it's a great resource and helps maybe narrow through that book a little bit and figure out what would be best suited for your landscape. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide the maintenance level that you want for your landscape, to decide the amount of inputs that you're going to use to keep up your landscape. So we think about water needs. You can decide how you structure your landscape, how you use water. Turf like this, tall fescue in full sun, is going to require more ongoing maintenance, care, fertilization than just kind of a more loose turf grass. And so when you think about the plants that you bring into your landscape, think about the water needs. Think about what's called hydrozoning, where you group plants of like water needs. I'm not going to stick in ornamental grass and maybe a hydrangea right next to each other and expect that their needs are going to be the same. They're going to be different. And so when you think about how you build your landscape, how you group your plants, you're of course going to be thinking about what looks good. You're going to be thinking about what you like. But when you think about the input requirements, and water being one of those, and you make that a part of your planning process, you're going to have much more success moving forward. And I will tell you that tall fescue is one I think certainly I see all the time, but also trees and shrubs in the landscape. More often than not, people kill their plants with too much water than they do with not enough water. And in fact, overwatering symptoms, the stress symptoms on plants resembles drought stress. So just because your plant is looking stressed, if you know you've been giving it water, more water is not always the solution. There are other things to think about. And so keep those things in mind as you think about how you plan and manage your landscape. Really quickly, I just wanted to highlight this so you have a better idea of our role and what we do. I work for Oklahoma State University, so do Dr. Moss and Dr. Moore, and we're a part of a division of the university that has 3 branches. We do research, we also teach students, but we have what's called an extension service. Every land-grant institution across the United States has an extension service, and our goal is to take information, research, and teaching that comes out of the university and serve our state and the people of our state through what's called cooperative extension. And so that's what we're doing here today. We extend the university to you. And you can find out more about extension if you go to oces.okstate.edu. And what does it look like? So extension, we are OSU. We have federal partners, state partners, county partners, cities like the City of Edmond. All of us work together to make our mission and our goals a reality. I appreciate you coming.